Okay, so hello, good morning. Welcome to today's session. We're looking at the T-level education in early years, specifically at elements 10 and 11. And we've already had a little bit of chat about what we like to get from today's session, and it is about confirming that what you're teaching is correct, what approaches you could use, sharing best practice, and having a little bit of an update as well on where are we at. So my name's Helen Scanlon. I'm part of the provider development team, and I'm here representing Sarah Dagger, my colleague in the team who's currently out of the office poorly. So I'm going to hand over to Janet to say hello as well.
Oh, thanks, Helen, and hello, everybody. So, yep, I'm Janet King. I'm the Sector Manager for Education and Childcare at NCFE, and lovely to be part of the presentation and to interact, because this is absolutely back in the comfort zone of working with a great group of professionals. So fantastic to be here. Thanks, Helen.
Brilliant, thanks, Janet. So we're going to explore elements 10 and 11. We're going to share ideas and strategies for teaching those elements in an interactive, engaging and fun way. The word fun has been brought in. It's not normally brought in when you're talking about legislation, so brilliant. And also look at some resources, resources that NCFE make available, and Janet's going to talk us through the toolkit and what's there. So those are the agenda points today. Please use the chat to ask any questions. We will keep an eye on it. So first thing I'm going to do is ask about your starting confidence levels. You've got a QR code on the screen there, which is if you have a smartphone or a smart tablet, it'll take you straight to the Mentimeter that we're asking people to fill in as the first task. So it's how confident are you in the teaching of the elements 10 and 11? And on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is low and 10 is high. I'm going to put the link that's on the screen there into the chat as well, just in case you don't have a smartphone and aren't able to access it through that means. So bear with me while I copy that in there, and then we'll start off that Mentimeter. So how confident are you in the teaching and learning of elements 10 and 11? That's our starter question. Just going to work back to Mentimeter. Move my screen. No, I'm not going to move my screen. Bear with me a second. Just pull this over for the second so I can see the results coming in. So how confident do you feel in relation to the teaching and learning? Oh, so 5 to 6 has gone straight to the top. That's bang, smack
Good.
bang in the middle. It's a good one. Yeah. Janet, where would you see if you were teaching this, where would you see yours were, your level
If
was?
yeah, if I was teaching it, probably about the same, maybe
Mm,
maybe a little higher, but maybe towards the 6. Yeah, because it's
mhm,
one of those subject areas that you do need to keep being innovative with. A,
mhm.
it changes all the time, and B, I think you have to adapt what you do, don't you, to the cohorts that you've got. And it's
Yeah,
always thinking about things that can be engaging. So we can never know everything. And I think when it comes to SEND, we'll never know everything. Because there's just too much to know, and there's so much we don't know that we discover all every day. So yeah.
brilliant. Thank you. And I see people have already, thank you, started filling in the next bit. So the next question relates to the actual spec and the actual content. So in the spec, we've pulled out some of the legislation, some of the regulations. Which of the following codes or frameworks do you feel are the easiest to teach is our next question. So if you can go on, if you've done that next page, sorry, if you've done the first section, please move on to the second. Just tell us in the chat if you have any problems, if that's okay. And if you're not able to tell us in the chat, sorry, if you're not able to use Menti, please let us know in the chat. Which of those do you think is the easiest to teach? Which do you find easiest? Because everybody will have a different take on this, and as things change and update, your attitude towards, your confidence level in actually doing this is going to be different. So I think the conversation Janet and I had before we set this up is ringing true by the looks of it there, Janet, because Equality Act has come
Interesting.
out
Yeah,
in
yeah.
top there. Any
Yeah.
comments on any of that, Janet?
I think my comment would be, I mean, I would have said the Equality Act. I would have gone for that. And the reason being that I think that's the one that we generally sort of see as overarching, and we're not as familiar perhaps with the rest, and some of the others may feel a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So part of today will be about looking at which aspects of Children and Families Act do we need to know about? How does that relate to the SEND Code of Practice, and how does everything fit under this large umbrella of equality, diversity and SEND? So yeah, that rings true, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thanks, Janet. And thanks, Rebecca. She raised the question, legislation that is easier to teach. I mean, what makes it easy, and what makes
Good
it
point.
engaging?
Yeah.
It's a really good point. So thanks, Rebecca. Excellent. Okay, so we've got a lovely feel there of where you're at, which is really important. So I'm going to hand over to Janet now to talk through the exciting legislation.
Oh, well, here we go. Okay, so let's look at elements 10 and 11 and begin with that legislative framework. I can never say that word. So the framework for legislation, let's say it like that. So a good place to start here could be by considering those 4 general principles that we can see for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And what we've got those 4 principles: non-discrimination, which is touched upon in Article 2, best interest of the child, touched upon in Article 3, the right to life, survival and development, Article 6, and the right to be heard, having a voice, Article 12. One way to teach this could be to break down each principle, use them as pillars or building blocks to begin all exploration of equality, because in a way that's what this is doing. Rich discussions can begin with these as pillars, as starting blocks, building blocks for everything else. And you could use case studies, which I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do all of these things, by the way, but you could use case studies and media coverage to consider the impact of discrimination. How staff working in education and early years promote the UNC in their daily practice, quite incidentally. So what do we mean by non-discrimination, anti-discriminatory practice, equality, diversity? What kind of policies go with that? So it's making things make sense in the world of education and early years, but using the terminology from that legislation. Now, when I was looking at this, I also came across something by the Young Persons Advisory Service, so YPAS. And if you look at that, if you look on their website, and I'm sure others exist, but I found this one quite user-friendly in terms of student accessibility, because it had some really short, thanks Helen, some really short video clips in there. And I thought, do you know what? That's a really nice starting point for this, because they talk through these articles. So you could ask students to, once you've talked about these different terms, to look at these articles, not to wade through large pieces of legislation, but to look at these articles. And sometimes a nice little video clip helps and kind of talks to the student in a different way. And it feels a little bit different than looking at text all the time. So lots of discussion, lots of case studies and scenarios, but then using some short video clips as well that will bring these acts to life. So they look at the various articles, and incidentally, whilst not implicit to the specification, there are obvious links as well, which I wanted to sort of raise, to sustainability, because the sustainable development goals, those 17 development goals, whilst they are not sort of deliberately prescribed in the specification, they do talk about zero hunger here. They do talk about so zero hunger, and no poverty. So looking at those, and the Sustainable Development Goal number 4 that looks at quality education and that access to education. So these things, you're beginning to develop a thread that runs through the legislation, but starting with these pillars. And if you say, right, we're going to look at legislation, we're going to start with the UNC rights of the child, and these are the 4 pillars that we're going to be concentrating on, and we're going to thread everything else that we do from this. And we talk about, what do we mean by being non-discriminatory? What does that even mean? And then following that up with some videos and with some case studies and some real examples of how we do that in an education and early years setting. So what policies do we follow? How do we model this? How do we do this in a sincere and genuine way? What do we actually mean by being non-discriminatory? Okay. So the one that most people found the most straightforward, I'm going to edge away from easiest, the most straightforward to teach was coming up as the Equality Act 2010 in lots of cases. And from such a strong base, when you've got your 4 pillars, you could consider the Equality Act and you could break down discrimination using using examples to define direct and indirect discrimination, because young students will get confused by that. You know, exploring discrimination and therefore anti-discrimination, fine, we can get that, we understand that, let's take time with the UNCR getting that. But then what do we mean by direct and indirect? Isn't discrimination just discrimination? So again, using some examples there and really bringing that together with case studies so that examples are very clear. And what you could do then, you could ask students for any examples that they might be willing to share and discuss the impact on children and young people. So examples can take on a much deeper context when you start exploring those protected characteristics: age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex, and sexual orientation. So you could use those protected characteristics as part of your case studies to bring those into the mix. But I wouldn't take it for granted, and you will know that your students will understand you know, to go straight into direct discrimination and indirect discrimination might be a step too far. So really starting those building blocks and weaving the learning from one piece of legislation to another, because they overlap, and it's just about recognizing where they all start. So you can see a little bit of a display or a flowchart coming on here. So these characteristics are identified as protected as evidence shows there is still significant discrimination in employment, provision of goods and service, access to services such as education, health inequalities. We read about that all the time. And there is something that I came across that you might have come across yourselves. There's an easy read version of the Equality Act, and it's really quite straightforward and simplistic in its terminology and explanation, which I found really useful. And I think students would also then be able to see key features rather than wading through something and missing key points. And that's on the gov.uk website. So students may benefit from looking at that for clarity, having a little group discussion around that, thinking about case studies and how the Equality Act protects individuals from discrimination in using the legislation to help. So when teaching, you could break down each area, looking for examples of indirect and direct discrimination, as I said, but perhaps building on learning of those protected characteristics by using them central to your case studies. That will give a gentle and gradual consolidation of knowledge. Always bring things back to the context. What is the impact of any sort of discrimination within education and early years? And what are we doing about it? What is in place across education to ensure equality is upheld? That's why we have legislation. That's the thread that you're trying to weave through the building blocks. And valuing equality, practicing, modelling, advocating for equality, that might be a fairly straightforward concept, because we're all vulnerable to that. We can probably all recall examples where we have directly been impacted or indirectly because we've seen and witnessed other things happening. So discrimination is all around us. So it's quite a straightforward concept. But when we move on to the next slide and we start to think about SEND, we've got wider implications for diversity and inclusion. It's a lot more complicated. and arguably not as widely easy for students to relate to because it's massive. And we might have some examples that we can share as students. We might have some examples that we can refer to as ourselves as professionals. But it's so diverse, it's so wide, that it's a very difficult thing to say, I'm going to teach you about SEND, because it's like, ooh, how are you going to do that? That's huge. That's impossible, in fact. And so it's a huge area and more complicated. But I would say, it's impossible to know all there is to know about SEND. But a good place to start is that SEND code of practice. And I know that somebody did say that that's one that is a go-to. They're confident with that as a teaching aid. Now, when you look at the SEND code of practice, and perhaps you've only just come across it as a student and you've only just heard of this, or it's a new teaching area for yourself, it might appear, this is complicated. Where do I start with this? I can't wade I can't find a way through that. And it can be a little bit off-putting for students, of course. So a really good place to start is by looking at those 4 broad areas, because all aspects of SEND are going to fit or be anchored to one or more of these areas of need. So rather than be put off by the fact that, wow, this is a massive piece of legislation, this code of practice is something that I can't get my head around, narrow down what you need to know. Because teachers, SENDCOs, staff working in education in early years, I was talking to somebody from University of Derby not long ago, and he was telling me, Janet, just concentrate on those 4 broad areas of need. And I thought, yeah, okay. So I came back, had a talk to myself, reflected, and thought, no, okay, this is okay. So if we look at the 4 broad areas of need, this is going to be a good starting point. So you don't need to know everything in that code of practice. You need to know that there are these 4 broad areas. It can be perceived as complicated, but it's a good stepping stone, a really useful place to begin. So all SEND is likely to fit into or across those 4 broad areas identified by the code of practice. So to me, the best place to start. And that also can be found on the gov.uk website. Now, there are links between Part 3 of the Children and Families Act 2014 and the SEND Code of Practice. In a nutshell, the Children and Families Act 2014, what that is really there to do is make children's lives better. And part 3 of that is concentrating on SEND. So here you can see the thread. How is that connected to the code of practice? How do I do that when we've got 2 massive pieces of legislation? So we look for the thread, and there's the thread. It's about making children's lives better. We can all buy that. We can all relate to that. And in particular, with SEND in mind, it's that part 3. So here you will find the main requirements of the Act. Significantly, this Act introduced a single category of SEND support, and SEND support involves a personalised approach to meeting children's needs. So the connection to families, it's promoting parental involvement, parental engagement. It's searching for, and a good activity would be for students to search then in local authority websites or on their local authority website for a school information report. So we're seeing these threads. Okay, so we know about the UN Convention now, about those 4 pillars. We now know how to build from those with the Equality Act, with the indirect discrimination and so on. We're then having this build of SEND for diversity and inclusion, and we're now thinking about, well, how do we make sure that's informed to families? How do we do that? We do that through the Children and Families Act, and local authorities have got an action there through a school information report. Now, that's sometimes called a SEND report, it's sometimes called a SEN information report, and you're looking for that, and that is what leads to and informs the local offer. So these are all terms that are brand new, and they are all a bit of a maze and difficult to get your head around if actually you don't know which bits from these different pieces of legislation are the best fit for the building blocks. You could literally pile them on top of each other, but what bits do you need to know? And this would give you a little bit of a path through all of that terminology and all of that legislation. So, searching for local authority school information reports, or SEN information reports, as they're sometimes known in some local authorities, may be a useful activity for your students. There is then a connection between that information report and the SEND local offer. And the local offer, that's what informs parents and families of the services and the access to such services within their region, individual schools, settings across a local authority. And that creates a search tool for families seeking SEND support. Now, not only do families not know about this necessarily, and are just given the terminology, oh, what's your local offer? What do you mean? So it's about having that professional knowledge, that working professional knowledge, not to be able to come out with, oh, on page 3 of the Equality Act. Who's going to do that? It's about knowing what you need to know as a professional in education in early years to be able to support children, to be able to uphold that Children and Families Act principle, making children's lives better. That's what all this is about. Well, if we keep that as our golden thread, and we can then, as individuals, as students, create and develop those students to have the knowledge to say, let me tell you where you can find out about your local offer, and you're working down and you're working back. And so you could have discussions, you could have some kind of mock interviews and mock scenarios where students are looking at a family's plight with a child who needs to access services for a particular SEND, for example. And you're looking at which local authority will be better. You're then looking at that inequality, because you're able to then say, oh, well, you can access that in Bournemouth and Poole, but you can't access that in the northeast, or you can't access that in the northwest or the southwest. So why? And you're opening up those debates around inequalities. And the main thing is to, well, I'm in this region. What does my region offer? But actually, is it different if I live somewhere else? And unfortunately, it often is. So running through all policies and procedures, of course, we can find confidentiality, and that's really important. And this is another thing that is absolutely critical when you're talking about legislation, when you're talking about that role of the professional in education in early years. The importance of data protection, the importance of information sharing, online security, a professional code of conduct, and being aware, always remembering what makes children's lives better. That's a good one, because actually sometimes you do have to share information, what policies are in place to ensure that happens. How do you protect yourself as an education and early years member of staff when information is so sensitive? What's in place for you? What supervision is in place? What do you do when you're carrying all of this sort of sensitive information, and when you need to pass on that sort of information? So there's a lot there, but hopefully you'll be able to see how that legislation, actually you take bits of it and you keep a common theme, and making children's lives better running through as a sort of golden thread throughout all of those. You could bring that alive, but I think the most important thing is that a student does see those connections, that you begin to see how actually this is one topic area. There are many pieces of legislation, and they are all about making children's lives better. How do they all fit together? How are they all connected? Helen,
Janet,
you've come on camera.
Yes, I was just going to come in there because everything you've said there, so much detail and some really good ideas, Brilliant, thank you. I think the theme that I was picking up there as you were talking is the importance of the why, asking themselves, why is this, why is that? Developing those reflective, analytical, and evaluative skills at the same time, and not just accepting what is said, really pulling apart why it's being said and the impact it has in the context that they're in, and then comparing even just their own. There'll be different approaches in their own local areas, so bringing in their industry placement experience and comparing across their placements and just their area alone, and then asking them to look more widely, as you say, but really focusing on the why and not just the what.
Absolutely. And you can see, can't you, Helen, how that would actually naturally, hopefully, organically evolve if we don't rush through these subjects rather than, right, we're going to do legislation and we're going to get that out of the way. You don't need to get that out of the way if you are able to make it something that's meaningful and that connects to a wider curriculum, so to speak. So that kind of, what is this? Let's really understand this, because making children's lives better is absolutely a building block that's core across the qualification. How do we do that? And then thinking about, well, what are these pieces of legislation? How do they connect? Why are they so important? And actually asking then those sorts of questions. Oh, okay, so we don't have any children with SEN, so we're not supporting our local offer. Having that right terminology and developing those professional skills as well, thinking about, okay, so things aren't necessarily always fair, but this is the best that we can do. This is our local offer. How do people feel about that? Does that mean that our services for our children in this area need to be improved? What can we do to improve them? Do families know about this local offer and about the services that might be available? So absolutely, starting to then analyse and think about those inequalities and the importance of advocating for children's rights. It's tying it all in together, but making it really interesting, making it really rich, making it a course for inquiry. But yes, I know there are 12 elements to get through, but actually this could be done over some time, and you could put, these are two elements, and they work very well together. Is what we're saying here.
And also, can I quickly ask about how treating legislation in isolation doesn't feel right either, because it'll impact on everything the students do and the sector does, automatically making links to the other elements and how legislation impacts on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what you could do if you have these, and I can see a display and things going on over here with all those different building blocks, and to keep then being able to come back to it, perhaps, so rather than teaching things in a methodical order, excuse me, if you were teaching in elements, for example, but thinking about, actually, I'm going to do legislation, not to get it out of the way, but to actually give a core of policy and procedure. So where's my wider context? Let's remind ourselves about where we work and why we work, and ultimately wearing that badge of, we're here to make children and young people's lives better. Absolutely fundamental and very straightforward concept. And how do we do that and plot those things? But you're right, education, the curriculum does that. How does it do that? How does it ensure people's individual needs are met? So you could actually take this and you could look at the core curriculum, the syllabus, and you could think about, right, okay, so in element 2, where's the bits that talk about meeting individual needs here? Let's talk about that now. So there are opportunities to either consolidate later on, or to introduce when that time's right to introduce that new element. You're absolutely right. It covers everything. Working with other professionals, often you're doing that more when you are thinking about these sorts of areas. So 5 and 6 is another good example of where they come together.
Brilliant, thanks, Janet.
Okay, now the next few slides, I'm going to read through the next few slides because these actually flow from those sorts of things that we've learned about. So the effort, the intensity of the learning is in that and making sense of that and really investing time in getting those building blocks right. But when you feel as though, right, these students understand all the different terminologies, but they really understand it to be able to contextualize it, you can begin to start looking at policy and procedure. So how is this legislation implemented? What's going on in education and early years settings to actually make sure that those things are being maintained, that it's being upheld, that actually we don't have a policy and a procedure just because it's there and that's what happens. We have to do that by law. So we know what the law is now, and there are consequences to not doing that. And how do we uphold that? How do we make it our working practice? So this helps us then to start thinking about our own role as staff working in education and early years, our own role and responsibilities. We link to practice working documents. Students can explore policy and procedure. Have they ever looked at anything that actually their own policy and procedure, student code of conduct, for example? Why do we have that? Do we have any policies and procedures in our schools and colleges? Are they good examples to how students are of sort of practicing within an inclusive environment? Start with where you are and what matters to them. And then, of course, thinking about looking at policies from their own placement experiences and bringing those in, or indeed looking on the website for examples of policies and procedures also, rather than downloading and printing things off and adding to the tree demise. So how can that legislative framework be traced to policy and procedure? Now, one of the things I did, and I remember doing this with an Ofsted inspector, and he told me afterwards that was a bit risky, and I thought, oh, here we go, all downhill from here. But it was actually a good session. So I was lucky. I took the risk, but I was lucky. But one of the things that I did, and I'd planned it so that you just get on with it, don't you? But I wrote down all the different policies that you might have in an education early years setting, you know, the obvious, the health and safety, the diversity, the inclusion, the equality, and so on. I wrote all of these terms down that you might have as a policy. And then what I did is some students, I put them all around the room, and then we had pieces of legislation, and the students would connect. Oh, my piece of legislation connects to that policy. And in the end, they were threading all, and then they had procedures, and they had to pick up a procedure. So my procedure lives with health and safety. My procedure is all about child protection, going to the safeguarding policy over here. My policy is all about access to education curricula. It's all about SEND. I'm going over there. And they would have all of these procedures. And some people were stuck. And I said, why are you stuck? And he said, well, I don't know. I don't know whether it goes there or there because it could go to both. And then what we started to do then is open up a conversation, because other people would say, yeah, I think mine does as well. And they started then to see that actually all of these policies and procedures can be anchored to maybe a primary piece of legislation or area, but they all overlap. And they started to thread these, and they were all we created a bit of a web with all of these things. That was the risky bit, according to Mr. Ofsted. But it worked well. And what it did show is that actually everything we do is actually part of protecting children, of giving children the best possible start and the best possible outcome, making children and young people's lives better. And then, we began to think about, well, what are the challenges and the barriers to that? What goes wrong? And in particular, with keeping 10 and 11 in mind, because that was a very general activity that talked about policies and procedures wider than equality, diversity and SEND. But you could do that just with those in mind, and looking at some of the key terms that you've introduced. Again, a good way of remembering, oh, that goes with that goes with that piece, that act, and so on. But then how they all overlap. And then the challenges and barriers to equality and diversity. You know, if the students have gone through these different activities and experiences where they've done some case studies, done a bit of research, listened to some of those video clips, explored policy and procedure, looked at local offer, then they're in a good position to start discussing. And you could have some really rich debates and discussions, you know, around this. And those sorts of things are really helpful. Unit 9, I'm thinking now, and element 9, and where you're talking about those reflective, and you're talking about those debates and contemporary issues. Well, we could think about inequalities in education and so on. We could be bringing in those debates around the local offer. So thinking about that and having those rich discussions and those debates around, it depends where you live. Oh, it shouldn't depend where you live. You know, really setting a hypothesis for discussion is good, and students will really enjoy it if they've got that learning that's gone on to back them up in that. And then you can expand on that, because these are all things that are going to help with ESP preparation as well, in terms of that confidence to share your view, that confidence to give feedback to somebody, and that sort of professional skill of accepting when somebody's saying, yeah, okay, you've got a point. So that sort of thing is really expanding that professional skill and that personal development as well. Presentations, working with peers, all of that is part and parcel of the challenges and the barriers, and how you might be able to do that, rather than just having that as a one session. It could be a really rich sort of consolidation of where you are. So I'm just going to pause for a moment, because we've got a little reflection point here in terms of what works well in teaching and learning. I don't want you to give me too many hints and tips, but if you want to come on, or if you want to pop something or keep popping something in the chat about what works well in your teaching and learning, be thinking of that all the way through, because we'll have a little interactive activity later on. But when you've actually looked and you've got to the point where you're bringing it back into the context, then students will be able to identify what works best for them as well. It's better for me. I feel included when. It was horrible when. I remember when. There was a time when I saw a young child. This happened. And you'll be able to think about those different ways of, well, what went wrong? Very often things that go wrong that remind us of how we can put things right, and we grow and we learn. And something goes wrong every single day, doesn't it? So it's thinking about that, and always trying to bring some innovation into subjects. I think somebody said at the beginning, it can be very difficult sometimes to look at legislation because it can be a little bit dry. So what we're doing is turning that around and making this a sort of an area that's rich and that actually is core to what they're learning. So if we kind of don't hide behind the word legislation, but we say this is a framework for making children and young people's lives better. How do we do that? Well, we have to have some things in place that mean there are going to be consequences if we don't do them. We call this legislation, and then we introduce it, because I think legislation is one of those words that can be a bit scary. And when you're 16, it's probably a brand new word, and you just think, oof, you know, and that's going to be too hard. Students, when they see the word research, that's going to be too hard. I don't want to do that. What do you mean? So breaking it down is key to actually doing it. So actually thinking about the umbrella of legislation without having that umbrella open, and looking at what fits underneath that, and then this is your legislative framework once you understand it, is another way of making sure students aren't turned off straight away, perhaps. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, Helen, unless there's anything you'd like to share from the chat.
Yes, there's some wonderful pictures. I think the images of what equality of opportunity actually is really help. As I say, I'm ex-teacher trainer, so even adults learning to be teachers who have a lot more experience than, our normal 16, 17-year-old have trouble understanding what it is. Even I remember my first Ofsted inspection, I was actually asked, I worked for Bernardo's at the time, I was asked, what's equality and diversity? What does equality mean to you? And I said, well, it means treating everybody the same. And I remember saying it myself. And the Ofsted inspector said, is it? Actually, it's about treating everybody completely differently, isn't it? The exact opposite of what I've just said. But as I say, the pictures and the images that are popping up in the chat there, I found really helped trying to explain to trainee teachers what and access to HE education students what equality looks like in real terms. And that pictorial way is more accessible to a lot of learners, isn't it? So there's that, but having those really rich discussions about what it is, how it works, and having careful discussions about how it's impacted on either themselves or people that they know personally, bringing in their personal experiences, but in a supportive environment and in a safe place, because it is, like you say, it's a sensitive subject. It's absolutely it's a minefield. So creating the atmosphere and the environment that the learners feel safe in talking about it and challenging their understanding and challenging the understanding and beliefs and opinions of others is really important. That safe space to do that. But there's a couple of other really good points coming in about staff development, introducing legislation in how does it impact on their role, their responsibility, how to implement it, how to challenge it when it's not happening. What do you do if, do you say nothing? What are your responsibilities as a professional in the industry in relation to ensuring that they are participating and promoting that equality of opportunity and the richness of the whole of the classroom, the organization, the country in relation to how that rich, diverse population, whatever the context is so important.
Absolutely. And of course on here we're just looking about these key terms. So when we're thinking about inclusion, we're talking about providing support. These are just examples and things that you could share. Providing support for children and young people with SEND. And what does that mean now? You can see how you could trace that back to that local offer, to that school information report and SEND information report. So how does this all work back and how that fits in with the Children and Families Act because of parental involvement and engagement there, and how that then fits in to the code of practice, how it's fitting in with one of those 4 broad areas of need, depending on the child or young person's actual SEND need, and then how that's fitting in with the Equality Act. What are we bound to do by law? And what rights children have and how it all builds from that. So inclusion as a term needs to be something that can be seen in that sort of wider understanding of equality, diversity and SEND. And what it does is provide support for children and young people with SEND. And a question that could be asked once students are confident is, well, how? And that could be something that is introduced as some sort of hypothesis that inclusion works because when the best provision and support for children and young people with SEND is accessed, and you've got a discussion point straight away, and you've got some research opportunities straight away. Always starting with what we know. So when students are thinking about children and young people with SEND, at the end of the day, and the most important thing, and I know I keep saying this, but it's about tuning into that child, isn't it? It's about tuning into that young person. When you're teaching and you're working with a young person who presents with a particular need, whatever that need might be, you get to know the person. You get okay, forget about that. Talk to me, Janet. Let's get to know Janet. Let's see what's going on here and how can I develop that relationship with her. This is what happens, and that's what happens as well when we are working in education and childcare. So students themselves are going to be overwhelmed sometimes with when thinking about SEND, especially if it's something so new and the area is so new to them and they've never really been exposed to SEND in such a direct way. That's quite overwhelming and it's a little bit scary. So I think what is important is that we remember that actually don't be scared, don't be overwhelmed, and try to make a rapport and try to tune in to that child, just the way in the same way that we do when we're working with our young people. And then encouraging that understanding of the SEND code of practice 4 areas, because there's no way, when I was talking to a colleague at Derby, as I said, it was sort of, I don't know where to start with this one because I'm not sure how to help this individual the best way that I can. And it was, whoa, just start. And that's what reminded me of the building blocks when we were preparing for this, Helen and I. And so those 4 areas of need are actually, there's going to be an anchor there. Start with that. Start with that. What's the main area? Is it more than one area? Well, okay, that means you can start to actually explore what you can do tied into that young person or child's needs, depending on which areas of need are relatable. And that really helped me when I was working with a particular group of individuals. And then assessment, monitoring, and partnership working. Thinking about that graduated approach, thinking about how do we work with others to inform and to make sure that what we're doing is making a difference and the impact that that's having. Are we looking for particular aspects of progress? In which areas? Does it tie down to a particular area of need from the SEN code of practice? Is there a particular goal or focus that another professional has actually decided is what we should be working on now? And is that working? If it's not, then we challenge that. How do we challenge that? So you're looking at that complexity of partnership working there and the importance of making sure that throughout all of this, what really matters is that the child or young person is contributing, is participating, is making some sort of progress and being valued for and encouraged in what they're doing. This sense of inclusion. And very often, inclusion can lead to, to exclusion if we're not careful. I have to do that, and I'm going to do it with those students, and I'm going to take them over here, or I'm going to take them out, or I'm going to have to, or we're disturbing the rest of what's going on here. So it's about that adaptive pedagogy and about making sure that children, young people are feeling as inclusive and then can participate as much as they can. But it all boils down to that relationship. That's what it boils down to, because we all have unique, special ways of working. We all have our own needs that need to be met within a teaching and learning environment, just the same. And each of your students that may not be presenting with SEND, you will know what works for them and what doesn't. And that's exactly the same when it comes to trying to find out what works for children and young people with SEND. Get to know the child first. I know you know that, but that's a little clue sometimes for students who are feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Oh, there's one child with this particular need. I don't really work with him or her. Oh, why not? And it could be that that's just because, well, I don't really get them. I don't know how to communicate with them. I find it difficult, and so on. So it's about raising that confidence, because they are going to be the professionals. And that's what really matters, isn't it? That strong relationship and the want and desire to make that positive difference. Thank you, Helen. So this is always an interesting one. So we're now sort of moving into SEND proper, as it were, and we're looking here at the medical and social models of disability. And of course, there's a place for both, because we need to know what the facts are when an individual has either a long-term chronic health condition, which I know is part of these elements. So we'll look at those as we go through. But it's also important to know what's not going to make a situation worse. We need to know that. And so we need to know the facts about something. But the way then that we use those facts from an educational point of view and in a sort of educational aspect is to do so through that social model, putting the child and young person at the centre of everything that we do, and not necessarily looking for that I can't do that because. We can't do that with Janet because, or that's something that you won't be able to do, Janet, because. So those limits and restrictions of that medical model, and that sort of reliance on the treatment side of things, and that and as the name suggests, the medical and clinician side of things, if that's appropriate. The social model of disability, about making sure that's a real true thread of inclusion in a way, in terms of making sure that we're concentrating on that person and not the limits, but actually the potential. And so we're turning that around. So not how that condition might be limiting somebody, but rather what can we do to actually increase potential, and looking at it really through a different lens. But both have a part to play in making sure that the best possible outcomes are in place for that individual. We can't just sort of jump on the situation and say no, 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 he or she can do this, Janet, you are going to take part, and it becomes a humiliating experience for the individual. So we need to know what those limits are, but then we need to think about, okay, how can we make sure that we've got real potential, real experiences, real inclusion, so from that social model. And you can do that obviously in context with some examples, but again, bringing this to life, it's new terminology. New terminology is scary. New terminology, like anything else, if we don't know what it means, we can't give it any meaning, we can't categorize it, we can't think about it, we can't break it down. So students need to have those key terms, they need to understand it, and they need to feel familiar with what it means. And so by giving keywords, by exploring it in context, by bringing it into the world of education in early years and saying, okay, why do we need to have both? You know, that's even a rich debate in itself. And why, as educationalists, do we need to understand and appreciate the medical model? But then we're looking at this potential, we're looking at the inclusive side of things from a practical point of view in our day-to-day practice. So those case studies and scenarios will capture a range of perspectives and allow students the opportunity to identify and discuss each one and how they feel about each one, about the medical model. Does that really emphasize the limit and the treatment? How do they feel? And the social model, and how they sort of compare and contrast with each other. So again, good issues for discussion and debate. And there's some really useful ideas that are being popped in the chat there to help bring that alive. Thank you. So when we think about the impact to learning, obviously the student must understand how a primary, this is taken now, we're sort of taking things more directly from the specification now and the syllabus, and understanding how a primary disability might affect children and young people's development. And it talks about social and emotional, including, but not limited to, impulse control, language development, mood and emotion. So, okay, where does that fit in with our framework that we've just developed? How is that fitting into an area of need? Is it crossing over into more than one? So how do we break down what did that area of need mean? So we're beginning to then see how, by having a disability, it's going to be more of a holistic barrier. How? Let's think about those areas of need again. So we're consolidating, we're recalling, but we're also synthesizing that information and beginning to grow in our analytical skills as well, by thinking about how actually we're getting a really bigger picture and appreciation of how a child with a young person with presenting with a SEND need might actually be feeling, how it might have a holistic impact on them. So something that might be a physical disability is going to impact this, how, why, but bringing that into, and this could be a way through a scenario that you're actually then consolidating everything that you've learned about, so you're bringing it into practice. So impact to learning is really good. Thanks, Helen. And then, of course, we talk about physical development, attention, concentration, memory, sensory processing, motor control. So again, it's giving you examples here, I think, of things that you can use to contextualize what we've been talking about earlier on again. And it would all go back to, okay, what we're looking at here, we're looking at a physical area of need. Let's have a look. Where does that fit? What sorts of things? What can we think about? Could we do a little bit of research on conditions, on SEND that present with this? What does it actually mean? How do we use our attention and concentration? So how's it going to feel if we're not able to actually do that? What does it mean to be able to give attention and to concentrate? If we have problems with recall, what does that mean? How is that going to impact our learning if we're not able to recall information quickly? How does that impact the way that as a professional you're teaching and learning? Sensory processing, motor control. So thinking about all of these things and how one thing might impact on the other. So the student must understand a range of cognitive skills necessary for effective educational development. And here we're talking again about that overlap, about that holistic impact, how single or multiple disabilities might affect these. And it's bringing all of some of those things together. Attention, memory, short and long term, perception. How are people seeing things? How do individuals perceive things? How are they actually understanding the information? Are they able to reason? Are they actually able to hear, to listen, and to store that information? Are they better with auditory processing or visual processing? How do we find out about that individual need? And it all goes back, doesn't it, to don't be in the rush. Don't be in a rush to actually meet that child's needs because, oh, you know, there's a child or young person with SEND here. Maybe if I do that, everything will be better. I need to do that and everything will be better. This is about spending time getting to know that child and young person, listening to other professionals, thinking, don't know where to start. A lot of teaching assistants find themselves in situations where they are working one-to-one, for example, with individual children and young people presenting with SEND, with very little information to go by often and on a daily basis. And again, this can be one of those things where you say, right, okay, where is this anchoring in the code of practice? What does the code of practice tell me about this area of need? It gives me a good starting point to try and get things moving in the right direction. I'm then going to make sure I speak to the SENDCO. I'm then going to make sure I speak, I look at the graduated approach. What am I doing? Is this working? I'm bringing in the parents. I'm bringing in other professionals. I'm bringing in the SENDCO. So all of these things working together will be working towards the right progress. But it all stems from getting to know the child, getting to know the young person. And I think when we are in a mainstream classroom where children are not presenting with SEND, for example, or young people with no SEND, we do that. We do that without thinking because we're not looking for SEND. We're looking for individual participation and contribution. And then the child and young person that comes on with SEND, we're looking at them and we're perceiving that need in a different way. And yet, if we have those facts, remember the medical, the social, and we know a little bit about the area of need for that person, we've got all of that. And then we're bringing in, okay, so what does Janet like to do? How does Janet learn best? And it might be impacted by more things, but it's the same principle. And I think it's that idea of that being part of that inclusivity, that being part of that adaptive pedagogy, and all of those things I think can really help students to appreciate that this is what we mean when we think about inclusion, and not to be overwhelmed with SEND. And I think, you know, for those T-level students that are doing a teaching assistant occupational specialism, they may be sort of coming across this kind of and type of work more, because teaching assistants are working a lot in a one-to-one or small group with children and young people presenting with SEND. So they might see that sort of more than the early years, but it is still going to be present, as we know. And learning about it and learning about the knowledge side of it and using those case studies, it might be useful to use case studies that go across those occupational specialisms and when you're in the core. So making sure that you are looking, you know, things that are happening from birth right through the school years. Thanks, Helen. So here we're looking more at understanding cognitive difficulties and how this is all about how one primary condition, one special need is going to have an impact. And this is talking about language, communication, educational development, when those cognition, when there are cognition difficulties. So how is that going to impact reading, writing and comprehension? Well, how does that develop anyway? What do we mean by that? What are the steps within that? And therefore, how can that actually, what's going to impact that? What's going to interfere with that and interrupt that natural process then, if that's a typical process that we build in our early literacy skills and mathematical, our numeracy skills? And they look at that, don't they, when they're looking at element 7. So when you're thinking about child development and the different ways and the different stages and sequences, it's always a good way to be going back to that and reflecting on that. Well, what do we mean by that anyway? We have to keep reminding our younger students, what do we mean by typical? And then we can start to think about when might things be different? Why might things be different? And what kind of SEND would present with cognitive difficulties? Vocabulary, communication skills. How does it develop in the first place? What could interrupt that? And we've got attention span again, coordination, reasoning again, memory again. So already we're overlapping anyway with everything that we've been talking about so far. And it all comes back to getting to know that child, getting to know that area of need, and then thinking about how those different areas of development, how they actually all overlap, but how there might be some key terms that might be associated with physical, with social and emotional, with cognition, and how those actually can impact the way that children and young people learn. And what do we do about that? And how does this legislative framework and the policies and procedures and the rights of that child and young person impact what we do and make sure that what we do is having that positive measure, that positive impact? So we have to appreciate how these areas of development might be impacted greater by having a particular SEND that's affecting that area. But we also have to then reflect on what we do about that, the so what of it all, I suppose. So making sure that, okay, yes, here we have a child who's presenting with cognitive and emotional behaviour concerns. So the student begins to then, okay, that might mean that this child is having difficulty processing information, that this child is having difficulty being able to regulate and things like that. So they're able to use words to actually build a picture of this child and young person. So the more you can do through case studies, scenarios, discussions, examples, the better. So here's a child, he or she is 10 years old and they're presenting with cognitive difficulties. What might that be? And then you're looking at, they might be impacted. They're going to need some support with their reading, writing, comprehension. Oh, are they? Why? Because well, their attention, their recall. So you're building up on all of that. What is it? But doing it in that very logical way of area of development, specific impact on that child. And then if there's more than one area, how that all fits together to impact the child's overall learning and development. Okay, so bit of a leap now, and just thinking about that previous slide. I don't need to go back to it, Helen, but just thinking about that previous slide as well. You're thinking about those links, how these could be linked to any of the learning about the code of practice and those 4 broad areas of need that we've talked about, for example. And what about the impact of discrimination? What about thinking, okay, so we've got a young person here with cognitive difficulties. What's the vulnerabilities there? Because we know, and another debate, another discussion, that children with SEND are vulnerable to discrimination. Discuss. And actually, what can we do to make sure that we are aware of that? What are we doing to ensure that children are accepting and appreciative, curious, but appreciative of diversity? And how could that school or SEND information report and local offer support a child or young person presenting in this way? Absolutely, the importance of empathy when we're thinking about that appreciation. Children are curious. Children are not naturally discriminatory, but children are curious, and children will see, won't they? We all know that if something is appearing not as a mirror image of them and how they perceive themselves to be, then it's for discussion. It's up for debate, and it's about how that appreciation is enforced through that sensitive educational route. So, of course, health-related chronic conditions may impact children's access to development and learning. We know this, and we've got a list of some of those more well-known chronic conditions, I would say, here on this slide, and again, taken from the specification. So muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, severe allergies, cystic fibrosis, depression, and anxiety, they're linked together, I guess, Fragile X, sickle cell, and diabetes. And of course, these chronic conditions are requiring that adaptation as well. So it's particularly important that students are able to think about this. And again, how living with this, with a health condition, with a lifelong or chronic condition, how that is going to impact learning and development just in the same way, in terms of interruption, for example, and what we do about that, and that vulnerability to discrimination, and yet the right to access the quality education. What do we do? How do we do that? How do we make that happen? So we have to perhaps first of all, again, we have to define, and students could work together to define. They could do a little bit of research. They may have heard of some of these health conditions. They may know somebody, or they may have one of these health conditions themselves or in the family. So they can define, they can consider holistic impact. They can think about that vulnerability to discrimination, and that wider discrimination there in terms, thinking about direct, but also indirect in terms of services, in terms of accessibility, and how inclusion could and should be practiced to enable full access to a broad and balanced teaching and learning experience for those children and young people. Students could think about children and young people's rights. What about those parental rights we talked about in the Children and Families Act? And discuss as a peer group the potential perhaps as well to offer presentations, invite guest speakers, and talk about these specific needs. So it's one thing being able to define something, research something, and think how it might affect those different areas of development, and how there might be some indirect discrimination going on here, and we need to weave that out, and we need to challenge it, and we need to do something about it, and this is what we do. But hearing some, the richness from a guest speaker, somebody who may work with children and young people with certain conditions, or somebody who suffers. That's a bit medical model. Somebody who has a one of these conditions may also want to come and talk about that and just say, this is how I feel, or this is how this young person may feel. So there's lots and lots of things that can be done there to help that richer understanding. Thank you, Helen. So here, we're moving more on now to think about adaptive pedagogy. And this time we look at it through the lens of the augmentative alternative communication. Now, that's a mouthful in itself. So again, looking at, well, what do we mean? What is this? Has anybody actually used any of such equipment and such, thinking about the mobile devices, laptops, speech synthesis, the eye tracking devices? Have we seen any? Do we know about the image systems, the seeing things through pictures? So having a workshop where you can actually look at some of these things is really, really interesting. And I know in some local authorities, if you do make inquiries, or in some schools, and perhaps in some special schools, they might allow some visits, or they might put on a workshop for you where you can explore the different resources. Because we don't really understand something unless we can have a look at it, do we? Unless we can see, what do you mean? What is it? We're scared of things we don't know. Oh, what do you mean? I'm going to be using some eye tracking devices. What's that? What do you mean? So again, we need to see just how straightforward some of these things are. Thinking about those picture image systems and how that supports. But again, the non-tech communication, the things that we do, and the way that things are understood. We all have a unique body language, and children, young people with SEND may have an even more pronounced way of communicating. So the way that we might use our body language, the objects of reference, vocalizations, signing, communication partners, all of these things that help make children and young people's lives better. And this can be a little bit scary, again, if we don't know what these things mean. And actually, when we start to read through what it means, oh, okay. When and how speech can be supplemented or replaced. Oh, okay. That's what that means. So it's the familiarity with those terms. Helen, did you want to come in and share anything from the chat before we start looking at the resources?
Yes, sure, definitely. There's some good things coming in, and you've talked about empathy. I mean, I had the idea of when you were talking about, personal centered learning, how that is talked about a lot in the health T level. So just talking to health T level colleagues to find out about, the impact of person-centered care, and how they could help with the understanding of the medical side of things, in relation to how it impacts an individual. But something I've just popped in the chat there as well. I attended a CPD session, and they had visual impairment simulation glasses for people to put on, and then try and carry on through the lesson with these glasses on to get to get a sense of that. I was thinking, empathy is really important, but how on earth does a 16-year-old get into the the mind of somebody else to understand how something impacts, and easy wins or something like putting a pair of glasses on? You don't want to simulate very, very chronic conditions that are, really impair a child or young person's progress, access, etc. So yeah, there's a range of ways of doing it. But and then when you're talking about AAC there as well, having those experts, specialists coming into the classroom, having those discussions and presentations from people who have that depth and breadth of knowledge can really support. It's not up to our teachers for the T level to teach and know everything, because
Exactly.
nobody's a
So
specialist
wide.
in everything. Yeah, nobody's a specialist in everything is what's popping into my head. So bringing in people and talking to each other about who has got access to who, and again, the health T level teachers
Yeah.
might have other people who they have contacts with to bring in. So it's it's that's my bit anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Helen. So now we're going to take a little bit of a tangent to start thinking about what's available from NCFE really. And I don't know if you've seen the Education and Early Years Career Toolkit. I'll draw your attention to that right now. And if you did type in, I mean, there's a link there, but if you typed in NCFE, Helen's very kindly popped that into the chat. Thank you, Helen. But if you type that in just as a sort of in your search, NCFE Education and Early Years Toolkit, it will come up, and you can access that, and it's got some really good areas to explore, and it talks to you about the different types of things. It's got the student conference links as well in there for you to join our very popular student conferences that run on a termly basis. So I want you to take some time in your own time to explore this with students and let students have a look at this, because it's actually quite a useful tool. Now, if we look at this, thanks, Helen, you can see all the different things in the quick links, and we're going to look at this one in particular, because in this section on the Careers Toolkit, it's got some aspects of continuing professional development, and there are many different areas that you can explore, and you can see there the types of areas that it talks about, and so on. Now, if we scroll down, I'm just thinking where send might live. There we go. We've got send there. So this is a good one. They're all very good, but this one in particular might be something that you use. Again, we were thinking about those video clips, those interactive, those making sense of something, making it a little bit different. And there are some things on here. Now, this has not been developed to be a resource for the T-level per se. This has been developed as a topic. And so for all students and for all professionals working in the sector, but it's relevant here. So you can see that there are some little podcasts on there. There are lots of little different bite sizes into some different aspects of SEND. And this is not to sort of say to students, right, you need to know about PDA, you need to know about pathological demand avoidance, you need to know about what the transitions of challenge. That's absolutely not what this is about. This is about remembering to put the child first and thinking about, oh, what area of need would this category, would this child fall into? Let's have a look at that. What are those needs? So you could use these perhaps as starters to case studies and things like that, or as consolidation and revision. I just wanted you to know that they're there, and they're small bite-sized areas. So it's a really good go-to place for students at the beginning of a session when you've taught a little bit, or at the end of a session if students have finished. They could go on the toolkit and they could see if there was anything on there about a particular area that you've been teaching. Always good if you can have a look first, obviously, but everything on there, it's changed regularly, it's updated regularly, and we talk to professionals. It is not going to be directly, as I say, related to a T-level element. It's a topic, but likewise you can see straight away that this is obviously relating to an element here. So useful to know about that. And things don't last longer. I think the longest podcast was 10 minutes. So and the shortest one is probably less than 3. So there are things on there that students will find that they can look at. So all sorts on there. I'm just thinking about the inspirational stories. Don't know if we can go back, Helen. No, this wasn't planned. So now anything could happen, ladies. Anything could happen. But
Back
there
to
is.
Back to send?
No, back to the opening sort of before you went on CPD, I think, Helen.
So we've gone back to the toolkit.
Going back to the toolkit, tuning in for inspiration.
Put this one here.
Yeah, let's see if there's anything on there that might be relevant. So there's lots of things on here. It's all relevant, but I'm just wondering. Oh, well, we can quickly go past that one. But that again, we've got different areas of professionals, and they're talking about what their role is like. So again, if you can't get guest speakers in, is there anything on here? Is there anything on here that will help inform about a particular need or a particular interest or something that you just happen to be learning about at the moment? So there's all sorts on there, and it's also quite interesting in terms of career journeys as well. So if you're thinking about a particular career, then there's things on there as and again, there's things being put on there all of the time. So do have a look and see if there's anything that can help you with any element. And as I say, there's also links on there to the termly student conferences, and we had our latest, most recent student conference on the 10th, so a couple of days ago now, and the recording will soon be up on there also. So yeah, and those are good, Helen, as well. Those in conversation with, those are quite good. Let's just have a peep at that. And you've got some professional seminars now. I think there's one there that might be, I'm trying to think of the Ewing Foundation. There's something on there from the Ewing Foundation. There we go. It talks about it there, doesn't it? So, and that, oh, it says coming soon, I think. Does it?
It does. It says we'll share this soon.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's one to look out for, because I'm just thinking about that augmentative and the AAC there for communication, because here we're talking about children, or Katie Mitchell from the Hearing Foundation is talking about working with children who are hearing impaired and deaf. So, and she talks about what you can do to the classroom and how 1 in 4 children actually will be suffering from glue ear in their early years, and actually then they're not listening, they can't hear. And so that really helps with the inclusion side of things as well. So very interesting. So look out for that, and just if you weren't aware of it, just there's a richness there. So do have a look if that can be of any help. So we just wanted to share that with you. Okay, if everybody's all right to carry on, I know we've been talking for a little while now, but if we carry on, I think we're going to do something a little bit more interactive now, Helen, aren't we? So we're going to come to that point. I know you've been putting lots of really, really rich things in the chat, which is fantastic. But what we're going to do now is set up a little Jamboard, and Helen's much more technical than me, so she'll be able to talk about the instructions for it. But basically, when I kept sort of giving you the nudge and the bit of a hint that we'll be looking for hints and tips of what you do well, or what's gone well, and helping each other, because that's what this is all about. So if you've got any really some hints and tips or areas that you're struggling with, and you want network support, this is a good opportunity through the Jamboard. So Helen, talk us through what we need to do.
Absolutely. So I've popped the link to the Jamboard activity into the chat, so you should be able to access it straight from there. What we've got, if you haven't used Jamboard before, do apologise if you know this inside out. We've got a sticky note section here on the left-hand side of the screen. Janet and I have put a couple of things on there already to get us going. But basically, what we'd like you to do is click on the sticky note. Choose your colour sticky note and put your idea in there. So I'm going to put those simulation glasses on there as an idea. As I say, learners who are active and don't like listening too much, don't like debates, don't like questions, need to experience it. If experiential learning is really important, these simulation glasses are an absolute Brilliant way of showing how to do that. So pop your idea onto the sticky note, click save, and then choose another colour or keep going with that colour. When you're finished, just cancel. And what we'll do is we'll move them around. If you'd also like to come off mute or talk, come up, put your camera on as well and talk, please feel free. So yes, wonderful. People are starting to put the ideas on there. So Janet, we can talk about them as they come on.
Absolutely. And if you can arrange a visit to a local SEND school, it's so rich, isn't it? And the experiences. And one of the first things, I spent some time working in SEND. This is when I was having my discussions with my friend at Derby. And actually, you will just feel so embraced in a special school. There's lots of laughter. It's not scary at all. Lots of laughter, lots of love, lots of calmness, things that students might not be expecting. So absolutely brilliant to go and visit a SEND school if you can.
I'm just going to make this one bigger because this looks really interesting.
Oh yes, I want to see this.
There's the one to read through.
Yeah. So I gave
Oh,
learners.
lovely.
Yes.
Sorry, lovely.
Yeah.
Asking them to rank and rate really gets them thinking more deeply about them, doesn't it? So absolutely love that.
I just thought I'd add as well, we did it just because there can't be anything more boring than just reading through a piece of paper and all of the rights.
Right.
So actually it made them think about them in more depth rather than just what they were. So yeah, it was a really good activity actually.
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you, Lisa. That's wonderful. Oh, comic strip templates.
Nice. Yes.
Yes.
Lovely. Yeah. The way you're making this come alive is just brilliant.
Yeah, I've played with Access to HE education students before, a consequences game where you have a sheet of paper, everybody puts a very brief scenario on the top of it. It gets folded down or folded up, depending on top or bottom, and the story builds. And it can go in any direction, it really can, but with the theme of, a person or a situation or a context, asking the students to create this story, and it goes off in all sorts of different directions. But the way you can use it in class discussions and talks is really useful. So seeing other perspectives and trying to think of how something might impact on somebody from a perspective is excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that blank comic strip template idea.
Great ideas, isn't there? Absolutely. Oh, now what's this one telling us, Helen?
Yeah, I'm just making it
Can't
bigger.
see that one. Yep, absolutely.
Wants and needs, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you need? What do you want? Absolutely. We all think we know what somebody needs, don't we? We don't necessarily know what's important to them.
Assumptions. Making assumptions is just huge, isn't it? Yes.
That's that medical model, isn't it, in action as well?
Yes,
you have,
it is.
therefore you must.
Yes. Yes, unfortunately. I had a blind PGCE student once, and the promotion of diversity just didn't have to happen because it was live in the classroom, and every group work activity we did, there was a scrap to who worked with the blind colleague, the blind trainee, so they could really find out their perspective. So I mean, YouTube's wonderful.
The most, don't we, from each other? We really do.
We do. Experiential learning. We just can't promote it enough, can we? It's
no, we can't beat it.
Walk in the shoes of somebody, or at least try to find out what it's like to walk in the shoes of somebody, to find out what it's like. Yeah. Any other ideas? Any other things that people have done? As I say, those simulation classes. If you've never used them before, they are amazing. Trying to just function in a classroom with a pair of those glasses on was absolutely mind blowing for myself. But I'm an activist. I have to experience it to understand it. So having that in mind, even just learning styles differences can be a barrier.
Brilliant. You know, looking again, you know, what have we got around us? What can we do to actually look at how we're supporting individuals with SEND? So yes, if you've got a SEND department, fantastic.
And getting them to pair up with a student to shadow them through their half day, morning, afternoon, whatever. Such a learning experience for students. And even if you don't have a SEND department, you'll have SEND learners. So talking to your other colleagues, talking to other teachers, trainers, lecturers, etc., to find out what have you got in your organisation that you can utilise in a supportive way, very sensitive and supportive way.
Absolutely.
Just checking the as I say, if you can't put anything on the Jamboard, please pop it in the chat. We'll put it on for you, and what we'll do is we'll capture this as a PDF at the end, and send it to everybody who's attended, so that you've got this to use in the future as well. You don't have to remember it all from today.
Brilliant.
Legislation experts.
Oh, nice. Little champions, legislative champions.
And somebody mentioned that in the chat earlier. They got their students to teach a legislation and its impact to each other. So that's where you'll automatically create that kind of jigsaw activity, isn't it? Because if you don't have the time or the opportunity and you want to maximize the classroom time, making the students the experts and doing the research and feeding back and asking questions about their legislation.
Yes, absolutely.
It really does help, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Such rich ideas.
Yeah. SEND coordinator coming in.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's true. We've all got somebody who's representing SEND within our training provisions, haven't we? So yeah, making the most of what's around us again. Yes.
Oh, lovely.
Good. Yeah.
Yes.
And then you can say, oh, so therefore this is what you can do and can't do. And then you think, well, no, not necessarily, because I'm still me. Da, 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 da. So lovely way of bringing in medical and social. Love that.
Excellent. Jigsaw term, yes, Louise. Using that jigsaw approach. Yes.
Fantastic.
And then weaving this through, not as I say, we talked about this earlier, didn't we? Weaving it through the whole curriculum and the whole year, rather than them seeing this as being standalone. Really important, that holistic approach, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And you can see how it would fit with everything. And you can keep coming back to it, because I know you've got to focus on different areas. You absolutely do. But you can keep coming back to it, can't you? And see if there's anything from these elements that that's relevant.
I'm just going to pop that into the chat as well as
oh,
nice.
On
this.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Brilliant.
Welcome to Holland. I
know.
Like that. I'm intrigued now. I want to go and see
I
it.
am. Yeah. Lovely. You see how excited we are, though, because that was oh, look, a little video. We had a couple, haven't we, that have thought, oh, what about this on YouTube? What about? And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Because we know that's going to help to consolidate with all the other things that we've got on here combined. Wonderful.
I've still got people typing in the chat box, so we'll just keep this going
a
little while longer.
What was that, Helen? That last little pink box, can that be made any bigger? Ah, yes. I've seen that one. Yes, thank you.
It goes with
yes, it goes
with the one beside it. Yeah.
It does. Thought a new one had popped in. Don't like missing out, me.
You don't. 4 more on the post-its. I've had students as well try. I've asked them at the beginning of a topic for them to define what different terms mean, rather than me telling them. It's like, okay, what does diversity mean? What does inclusion mean? What does direct discrimination mean in practice? Give me an example. to really get them thinking deeply about it, rather than the going into, what do I need to tell them? What do I need to teach them? It's like, no, let's facilitate them thinking about it and really deeply considering what a term means, what a situation, context means to somebody in real life, rather than just doing that telling. So
do that a
all
lot.
right. So I'm just going to share what Laura said in the chat there. So that Welcome to Holland is from the perspective of a parent who was a child with Down syndrome. Right. Brilliant. And don't limit me. Lovely. There's an advert on the television at the moment, isn't it, by a film producer, director who has Down syndrome, and it's all about him and challenging those perceptions of him as an adult.
Okay.
I've seen it, every time I see it advertised, my heart just leaps. But yeah, there's a wealth of stuff out there, and it seems to have exploded as well recently because of the promotion of inclusive practice and the benefits of it, rather than it being a requirement. There are benefits to this, and that's the approach that that I love at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of clips. It's great, Helen, that you're able to share this as PDF, because those web addresses are difficult, aren't they, otherwise to
exactly. We'll just give it another minute. We've still got people typing, so thank you so much. And people thank you are now putting links directly into the chat. Please feel free to do that.
Amazing.
If you've got anything to share, please.
Got some lesson starters.
Yes, to figure out where the starting point is, and the starting attitude as well. And I'm going to go back to that really important safe space for them to really, because it is hard challenging your own attitudes. And I just keep thinking back to myself at 16 and how difficult I would have found that. So it's being aware that 16, 17-year-olds don't have the life experience that we've got, and understanding and confidence to know that you're in a safe place to say X, Y, or Z. It's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, shall we go back to the PowerPoint then? And
yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. Such wonderful ideas. We've got a lot of rich things going on, and it's wonderful to see that and to be able to share them. This is what these kind of events that Helen and I and Sarah, of course, arrange. It's about what are you doing? What can we share? And Helen's got it there, sharing best practice, and that's so important. And just like students will learn from each other, we learn from each other all the time. So thank you for sharing and being generous with your knowledge there. Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly go back to loop input as well, because bearing in mind that these students are going to be working with children and young people in their placements and in their careers. So what's engaging and interactive to us as adults is different to what's engaging and interactive to students. And then again, it's different to what's engaging and interactive to children and young people. So there's there's also all those different levels to take into consideration as well. It's easy if you enjoy experiential learning, you enjoy learning through playing, through fun and through activities. That's great, you get it. But it can be a hard concept for students to get, and for us to remember what it's like as a child and trying to learn.
No, absolutely. And it's about these terms being brand new, and we struggle with these terms. We struggle with some of these sort of SEND related aspects in the legislation. So it's about really finding those core threads and how they connect with each other, and not trying to give too much information to the student. But it's really hard, because I think when you're learning something for the first time as a student, then all of the things that we talked about with that recall, that memory, because we're not familiar with it, so we're not going to be able to quoting Piaget now, but it'll be difficult to accommodate and assimilate that unless we have lots and lots and lots and lots of practice and reinforcement. So yeah, thanks, Helen.
Brilliant,
I enjoyed that. Thanks, everyone. It was really good.
Yes, and thank you for sharing. We will, as I say, we will be sharing that Jamboard with everybody, but also we want to facilitate more sharing of best practice. So please watch this space for provider development activities going forward. So when you're in the end, we've run through things quite quickly. So well done, everybody. I know how precious time is. So thanks a lot. We're not going anywhere yet, but we are going to ask you about your confidence levels now. We've reached the end of kind of our input section and your sharing section. How do you feel now? What we'd like you to do is just pop it into the chat. What number you are at now? In the chat, please. On that scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel now? What number are you at now? 1 being low, and 10 being high. Where are we at now? Oh, straight away, Lisa's coming with an 8. How wonderful. That's great. I mean, hopefully 8 now. Thank you, Julie. That's great. People are, there might not be very much, if anything, new that we've shared today. So I'm really pleased that you said that you just want to make sure that you're on the right track, you're on the right lines, you're up to date, you're doing it about right. So hopefully, if nothing else, it's consolidated that you are on the right track. You do know your subject, you do know how to engage your students in learning it. So brilliant. If everybody who's popped in the chat there now has gone up, because we were at 5s and 6s before, weren't we? So strong 8 for Rebecca. Oh, that's music to my ears. That's wonderful. But before we share the last bit, and the last bit of our bit is an evaluation form. I'm going to give you a link to an evaluation form on today's session, but we really want you to put any questions, comments into the chat before we let you go. So thank you, Lisa. Definitely giving me the confidence that you're doing things well. I think the breaking it down, because elements 10 and 11 are so huge, and to what depth do you go to what length do you teach this to? Given some structure on those 4, sorry, what did you call them, Janet?
Those 4 that we start with, your
pillars.
4 pillars from the UN, and then build on that with your 4 areas of need. Yeah, absolutely. And just making those connections all the way through, so that you don't lose that rich knowledge that your students might need for the assessments, but you're putting the context on it so that it's making sense, so that professional development is all going hand in hand.
Brilliant. Thank you. People are still typing, so I'm not going to say much more, and just let people type as well. I've put the link to the evaluation form there. We do need to share some contact details and things as well before we leave you. So this is not the final slide we've got, but same again, there's a QR code there if you've got access to a smartphone or a tablet. I've put the link in the chat if you haven't. But we're not going to go anywhere yet. I just shared that with you now, so that before the end of today, please, we do want your feedback on how useful you've found it. What can we do better? What can we do differently? And getting your input on what we do at NCFE to support your T-level journey. So Rebecca, thank you. Brilliant. Thanking everyone for sharing resource ideas from the portal and the web links and ideas from each other. It is really helpful. I mean, a lot of our providers, you work in isolation, and you might be a lone teacher with a lone assessor, working with a small group of students on a new qualification, with worrying about what you're teaching, how you're delivering it, new spec, new assessment methods. Just talking to each other in a session like this is really useful, isn't it, Janet?
Absolutely, definitely. And I think what it does is that it does offer that reassurance which people have talked about, in raising that confidence and making people feel that, yep, I've got this, and you absolutely have. And it's just wonderful for Helen and I to be able to hear the richness of what's going on. It's a lovely privilege and insight to what's happening with the teaching and learning. So thank you.
It really is. And I mean, I don't know whether I'm biased or not, but education early years teachers, you just rock. You absolutely have it on the nail.
Correct.
So I'm biased, obviously, but
So am
you're
I.
wonderful. You're wonderful. And as Janet says, thank you for sharing what you've done today. That's wonderful. If you need us at all, you can contact us via the provider development inbox, which the address is on there. If you've already got contact with myself, Janet, and any other NCFE colleagues, then obviously just please keep that as well. But if you feel a bit lost, that provider development inbox is monitored every day, every hour of every day, so that if for example a colleague is not available or not in, you can come to that one instead. So it's a bit of an alternative contact details that we're just sharing there. I'm going to encourage any final questions if you'd like to come off, pop your camera on, if you'd like to take your mic off. We're going to stop recording shortly because the generic everything is finished, and we do want to give you, because you've given the time today to come and join us, we want to give you some some protected time for yourself. So what we'll do is we'll stop the recording and we'll take any individual questions just to allow you to talk to us in a safe space, and knowing that it's not being recorded. So got lots of thank yous coming in. While I sort out the technical side of things, Janet, if you'd just like to finish off.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if anybody does have any questions, then obviously you might not have any questions now, but if you do, then do feel free to ask those and take yourself off mute. Otherwise, you know where we are, and we're open to questions and discussions and conversations anytime. So, we enjoy that professional debate just as much as you do. So yeah, do join us in with that. So if there's anything on your mind, we're here. But thank you so much for your time.